3,000 years without defeat. That was the legacy Rilak carried in his blood, in his bones, in every breath he took. The Vorani had conquered fear itself, breeding it out of their species through generations of discipline and training. When Rilak stepped off the transport onto the dusty surface of Tessara 7, he did not feel nervous. He did not feel excited. He felt nothing but cold, perfect readiness. The frontier moon stretched before him in shades of gray and brown. Coalition forces had gathered here to stop the Hollow Swarm, a mindless, consuming force that had already eaten 17 star systems. Rilak had studied the enemy. He knew their patterns, their weaknesses, their methods of adaptation. Victory was simply a matter of proper execution. His commander, a tall Vorani female named Sarath, assigned positions to the strike team. Rilak listened with half attention until she spoke words that made his scales tighten with displeasure. Rilak, you will serve as liaison to the human contingent. He wanted to object. Working with humans was beneath a warrior of his caliber. But Vorani did not question orders, so he simply nodded and walked toward the human sector of the base. He found them gathered around a fire pit, of all things. 30 soldiers in worn armor, sharing food from small containers and laughing at jokes Rilak could not understand. Their leader stood among them rather than apart from them. A dark-skinned female with short gray hair and scars on her hands. Her name tag read Okonkwo. Rilak announced his presence. I am Rilak of the Vorani 7th Strike Division. I have been assigned as your liaison. The laughter stopped. The humans looked at him with expressions he could not read. Finally, Sergeant Okonkwo stepped forward and extended her hand. Rilak knew this human greeting but found it strange. Why would warriors touch palms before battle? He shook her hand briefly. I have reviewed your unit's combat records. They are adequate. Adequate, Okonkwo repeated. Something moved behind her eyes. High praise from the Vorani. It was not praise, it was assessment. One of the younger humans whispered something to another. They both smiled. Rilak did not understand why. The tactical briefing took place an hour later in the command bunker. Representatives from 12 species crowded around the holographic display as Colonel Yusuf, the human commander of ground forces, explained the defense plan. Rilak listened and found the strategy acceptable, though not optimal. When the colonel asked for questions, Rilak spoke. Why are humans included in the primary defense line? Your species lacks enhanced physiology. You have no natural armor. Your reaction times are below average for coalition standards. The room went quiet. Colonel Yusuf studied Rilak for a long moment before answering. We volunteered. That does not answer my question. It is the only answer that matters. Sergeant Okonkwo added from across the room. We know the odds, Vorani. We came anyway. Rilak processed this information and found it lacking logic. Coming to a battle you would likely lose was not courage. It was stupidity. But he said nothing more. Arguing with inferior species wasted energy better spent on preparation. That night Rilak walked through the camp to memorize the terrain. His path took him past the human sector again. They had rebuilt their fire. Someone was playing music on a small stringed instrument. Others were singing. A few were crying and holding each other. He stopped and watched from the shadows. A young soldier with pale skin and red hair was showing pictures to his companions. Pictures of children, Rilak realized. The soldier was speaking about them with a trembling voice, and the others were listening with full attention. Danny, your kids are beautiful, Okonkwo said softly. You will see them again. The young one, Danny, wiped his eyes. What if I do not? Then you will die knowing you stood between them and the darkness. That is something. That is everything. Rilak found their behavior disturbing. True warriors did not weep before battle. True warriors did not waste their final hours on sentiment. The Vorani spent these times in meditation, sharpening their minds, reviewing tactics. This emotional display would only weaken the humans when they needed strength most. He returned to the Vorani barracks and reported his observations to Commander Sarath. She listened without expression. Humans are strange creatures, she said finally. They achieve results that should be impossible given their limitations. Perhaps their strangeness is connected to their effectiveness. That seems unlikely, Rilek replied. Sarath made a sound that might have been agreement. Get rest, the swarm arrives in 2 days. But the swarm did not wait 2 days. The alarm split the night 6 hours later. Rilek was on his feet and armed in seconds. He ran to the command post and heard the words that changed everything. Long-range sensors have failed. The swarm is already here. They will reach the perimeter in 20 minutes. 20 minutes? Not enough time to implement full defensive protocols. Not enough time for anything except chaos. Rilek sprinted to the human sector as ordered. He found them already formed up, weapons ready, faces hard. No more crying, no more music. They stood in perfect silence, waiting. Sergeant Okonkwo saw him and nodded once. Welcome to the line, Vorani. Stay close and stay alive. In the distance, the horizon began to move. A living wave of darkness rolling toward them, blotting out the stars. Rilek had studied the swarm in simulations. He had memorized their patterns. Nothing had prepared him for the sound. A million mouths screaming hunger across the void. Beside him, Private Danny Webb was shaking. His hands trembled on his weapon. His breath came in short gasps. He was terrified. And yet he did not run. Rilek did not understand. This human was clearly afraid. Fear should have driven him back. That was what fear did. That was its purpose. Hold the line, Okonkwo called out. Hold it together. The swarm hit the perimeter, and the world became fire and blood. The swarm poured over the outer trenches like black water. Rilek had never seen anything move so fast or in such perfect coordination. Each creature was a nightmare of teeth and claws and hunger, but together they were something worse. They were a single mind with a million bodies. Rilek fell into combat rhythm. His training took over. He fired 3 shots from his plasma rifle, switched to kinetic rounds for 4 shots, then cycled to electrical discharge. The swarm adapted to any weapon used more than twice in sequence. Every coalition soldier knew this. Every coalition soldier drilled for this. Around him, the Vorani strike team moved with beautiful precision. They were a machine of death, each warrior covering the others, each weapon cycle perfectly timed. This was what 3,000 years of evolution had created. This was courage made flesh. The humans were different. They fought in clusters, shouting to each other, calling warnings. Their weapon cycles were imperfect. Some switched too early, some switched too late, but they kept firing, they kept standing, even when the creatures broke through their lines, even when soldiers fell screaming. The others closed ranks and kept fighting. Rilek saw Private Danny Webb freeze. A swarm breacher had torn through the barrier directly in front of him. The creature was 3 meters tall, covered in spines that dripped poison. It shrieked and lunged at the young human. Webb did not fire. He did not move. He stood perfectly still, his weapon hanging loose, his eyes wide with terror. Rilek prepared to watch him die. Fear had finally done its work. The weak would fall. This was nature. Then Sergeant Okonkwo appeared. She did not shove Webb aside. She did not take his position. She simply stood next to him and spoke. I know you are scared, Danny. I am scared too. We do it anyway, together, on 3. 1, 2, 3. They fired together. The breacher fell. Rilek nearly forgot to switch his weapon cycle. He had seen something impossible. Okonkwo had admitted fear, out loud, in battle. This was weakness beyond anything he could imagine, and yet instead of collapsing, Webb had risen. Instead of running, he had fought. The first wave crashed against the coalition lines for 2 hours. Rilek lost track of how many creatures he killed. His arms burned. His scales were splattered with black blood that sizzled against his natural armor. But he kept moving, kept fighting, kept cycling through weapons. A cry went up from the Vorani section. Rilek turned to see one of his brothers overwhelmed. 3 breachers had caught him from behind. They were tearing him apart. Rilek ran, his legs pumped, his hearts raced. But the distance was too far. He arrived in time to kill the creatures, but not in time to save his brother. The warrior died looking up at the stars, his eyes empty, his body broken. Vorani did not mourn in battle. Vorani noted casualties and continued fighting. Rilak noted the casualty and continued fighting. But something in him cracked. The first wave finally broke against the combined fire of the coalition. The surviving creatures retreated into the darkness, leaving behind mountains of their dead. The silence that followed was almost painful. Rilak walked the lines assessing damage. The Vorani had lost 4 of 20, acceptable losses, sustainable. The humans had lost 11 of 30. He found them gathered around their fallen, not celebrating survival but grieving loss. Okonkwo knelt beside a young woman whose chest had been torn open. She closed the soldier's eyes with gentle fingers. Garcia was 19, someone said. She lied about her age to enlist. She wanted to protect her little sister back home, another added. Rilak approached. You should be fortifying positions. The main swarm force will arrive within hours. Okonkwo looked up at him. Her eyes were wet. Give us a moment, Vorani. A moment of weakness will not bring back your dead. Something shifted in the sergeant's expression. She stood slowly, wiping blood from her hands. You want to know what weakness is? Weakness is fighting without knowing why. Weakness is killing without caring who you kill for. Garcia knew exactly why she was here. She was afraid, and she came anyway because her sister mattered more than her fear. That is not weakness. That is the strongest thing I have ever seen. Rilak had no response. His training had not prepared him for this argument. A human corporal named Daishi stepped forward. He was shorter than the others, with dark skin and kind eyes that seemed wrong on a battlefield. You Vorani fight because it is what you do. We fight because it is what we choose. There is a difference. The outcome is the same, Rilak said. Dead enemies. No, Daishi shook his head. The outcome is everything. You fight to win. We fight so others do not have to. When this is over, if we survive, I go home to my children. I hold them. I tell them the monsters are gone. What do you go home to, Vorani? Rilak opened his mouth and found nothing inside it. The tactical officer called for all units to fortify. The moment passed. Humans and Vorani returned to their duties, preparing for the storm that was coming. But as Rilak helped reinforce the human bunkers, he kept thinking about Daishi's question. What did he go home to? More training, more preparation, more waiting for the next battle. Was that enough? For 3,000 years, it had been enough. Tonight, standing among creatures who wept for their dead and fought for their children, Rilak was not certain anymore. Okonkwo found him stacking sandbags. She worked beside him in silence for several minutes. You think we are fools, she finally said. Yes. Good, the enemy will think so too. That is usually their last mistake. She walked away before Rilak could ask what she meant. The second wave was coming. He could hear it gathering in the darkness, preparing to wash over them like a tide of hunger. This time when Private Danny Webb took his position, his hands were steady. Rilak did not understand why, but for the first time in his life he wanted to. The hours between waves stretched like years. Rilak had fought in many battles, but he had never experienced waiting like this. The Vorani way was to meditate, to sharpen the mind, to prepare the body. He tried to do these things, but his thoughts kept drifting to the humans in the bunker beside him. Commander Sarath had died in the first wave. The remaining Vorani in his sector numbered only 3, and 2 of them were badly wounded. Command reassigned Rilak to remain with the human unit as their alien support. He should have felt insulted. Instead, he felt something else, something he could not name. The humans had built another fire in the broken bunker. They sat around it, not planning or training, but talking. Some cried openly. Others held each other. A few sat alone, staring at nothing. Private Webb was weeping. His friend Garcia, the 19-year-old who had lied about her age, had died protecting him during the first wave. Now Webb sat with her helmet in his hands, tears running down his dirty face, making no effort to hide his grief. Rilak watched from the shadows. This display would never happen among Vorani. A warrior who showed such emotion would be removed from service. Weakness was contagious. Weakness spread. But the other humans did not pull away from Webb. They moved closer. They put hands on his shoulders. They spoke soft words Rilak could not hear. Sergeant Okonkwo noticed him watching. She walked over and stood beside him. "You think we are weak because we cry." It was not a question. Rilak answered anyway. "I do not understand. Crying serves no tactical purpose. It reduces combat effectiveness. It shows vulnerability to enemies and allies alike." Okonkwo was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer than he had heard before. "We cry because they mattered, because we loved them. Garcia was not just a soldier. She was a sister, a daughter, a friend. She had dreams. She wanted to be a teacher when the war ended. She wanted to teach children to read." The sergeant turned to face Rilak. "That love is why we fight. Take that away, and what are we protecting?" Rilak processed her words. "Vorani fight because it is our function. It is what we were made for." "And is that enough, to be made for something?" "It has always been." "Enough. But is it enough now, tonight, tomorrow?" Rilak had no answer. Corporal Daishi appeared beside them, carrying 2 containers of food. He offered one to Rilak. "No," Rilak said. "I require less sustenance than humans. You should save your rations." Daishi pushed the container into his hands anyway. "Sharing is not about need. It is about family. Eat with us, Vorani. You are part of this unit now." Family, the word felt strange in Rilak's mind. Vorani had genetic relatives, but they did not form bonds like humans described. Warriors trained together, fought together, died together. But family. He ate with them. The food was simple, processed protein and carbohydrates, but somehow it tasted different when shared. The humans talked while they ate. They told stories about the dead. They laughed at memories. They cried at others. Daishi spoke about his children. 3 of them, he said. 2 daughters and a son. The oldest was 8. She wanted to be a pilot. The middle one was 5. She wanted to be a princess. The youngest was 2. He did not want anything yet except to be held. "You left them to come here," Rilak said. "To a battle you might not survive." Daishi nodded, "Yes." "Why?" The corporal smiled, but his eyes held pain. "Because my children will grow up in a galaxy where someone stood against the darkness. Even if that someone was their father, even if he never came home, that is worth everything." "Are you afraid?" Daishi laughed. It was not a happy sound. "Every single moment, I am terrified. I dream about my children's faces and wonder if I will ever see them again. I shake when I hold my weapon. My heart races when I hear the swarm coming." "Then how do you fight?" "Because they need me to. Because the universe needs someone to say no to the monsters. Fear does not go away, Vorani. You just find something that matters more than the fear." Rilak sat with this truth. It contradicted everything he knew. Vorani eliminated fear through training, through discipline, through genetic selection. They did not feel it and overcome it. They simply did not feel it. Except that was not entirely true anymore. Since the first wave, since watching humans fight through terror, since hearing Okonkwo admit her fear and stand anyway, Rilak had felt something growing in his chest. A cold tightness, a shadow at the edge of his thoughts. He was afraid. For the first time in his life, facing odds that logic said were insurmountable, Rilak felt genuine fear, and he did not know what to do with it. The intelligence officer called all commanders to the briefing. Rilak went with Okonkwo. What they learned there turned his fear into something worse. "The main swarm force is 10 times larger than our initial estimates. Evacuation is impossible. Reinforcements are 3 days away. We will not last 3 days." Silence filled the room. Species who had never known true despair learned it in that moment. Colonel Yusuf stepped forward. He did not promise victory. He did not speak of hope. He simply said, "We will make them pay for every inch of this moon, and when they speak of Tessara 7 in 1,000 years, they will remember that free people stood here, that we did not run, that we faced the darkness and spat in its eye." The commanders returned to their units. Rilak walked beside Okonkwo through the ruined base, past wounded soldiers and burning wreckage. "You will all die here," he said. "You know this." Okonkwo nodded, "Probably. And you stay anyway." "Yes." "Why?" She stopped walking. She looked up at the stars, at the galaxy that would continue spinning long after they were gone. "Because courage is not about winning, Vorani. It is about standing, even when standing is all you can do. Even when standing is the last thing you do. We stand because someone has to. We stand because we choose to." Rilak looked at the stars too. Somewhere out there, Daishi's children were sleeping. Somewhere out there, Garcia's sister was waiting for news. Somewhere in his chest, the fear was still there, but beside it now, something else was growing. Something that felt like understanding. The second wave came with the dawn, but there was no sun on Tessara 7, only the pale glow of distant stars and the burning light of weapons fire. The swarm covered the horizon, a living darkness that ate the light. Rilak stood in the human trench now, not behind them, not beside them as a liaison, but among them as a soldier. Okonkwo had given him a position on the line without asking if he wanted it. He had taken it without questioning why. The creatures hit them like a hammer, bigger this time, faster. They had adapted to the coalition's weapon cycles and moved in patterns designed to overwhelm defensive positions. Within minutes, the outer lines crumbled. Rilak fought with everything he had. His training served him well, but something was different now. He was not fighting alone. When a breacher nearly took his head, a human private named Santos pulled him back. When Santos stumbled, Rilak caught her arm. They were not Vorani and human anymore. They were just soldiers, just survivors, just people trying to live one more minute. Private Webb was different too. The boy who had frozen in terror during the first wave now moved with terrible purpose. His face was empty of everything except determination. When creatures broke through the line, he was there to meet them. When soldiers fell, he dragged them back. Then the breachers reached them in force. 3 of them tore through the barricade together. Rilak and Santos killed the first. Webb took the second. But the third was faster than any creature Rilak had seen. It lunged past them, heading for a cluster of wounded soldiers who could not defend themselves. Webb threw himself in its path. The boy who had been terrified, who had frozen, who had wept for his dead friend, wrapped his arms around the creature's explosive core and held on. The breacher's self-destruct mechanism triggered. The explosion threw Rilak off his feet. When he looked up, Webb was gone, scattered, erased, but the wounded soldiers behind him were alive. Rilak's mind could not process what he had seen. Webb was afraid. Webb had admitted he was afraid. Webb had shook with terror every time the swarm approached, yet he had deliberately, knowingly, certainly given his life for others. This was not courage as Vorani understood it. This was something else, something greater. The battle raged on. Rilak killed and killed, but his thoughts kept returning to Webb's face in that final moment. Not peaceful, not resolved, terrified. The boy had been terrified when he died, but he had done it anyway. Sergeant Okonkwo took a spike through her shoulder. The wound was bad, deep, probably poisoned. The medics tried to pull her back for treatment. "No," she said, "I stay on the line." "Sergeant, you will die." "Then I die, but they need to see me standing." She looked at Rilak with eyes that burned with pain and something else, something like faith. Fear is contagious, but so is courage. She was right. Rilak watched the humans around her. They were exhausted, wounded, dying. But when they saw their sergeant standing despite everything, they stood too. When they saw her fighting despite her wound, they fought harder. This was not training, this was not discipline, this was love. They loved her and she loved them, and that love was stronger than fear, stronger than pain, stronger than death itself. The human medic, a woman named Grace with gray streaks in her dark hair, ran into open fire. A soldier had fallen 20 meters ahead. Grace sprinted to him, dodging creatures that would have killed anyone moving slower. She grabbed the fallen man and dragged him back. Then she did it again, and again, and again. On her seventh rescue, a spike caught her in the back. She fell on top of the soldier she was saving, shielding him with her body even as she died. The soldier was Vorani, one of Rilak's wounded brothers. Grace had given her life for someone not even of her species. Rilak felt something break inside him, something that had been locked away for 3,000 years of evolution. His eyes burned, his chest heaved, water ran down his face. He was crying. He did not know when he had started. He did not know how to stop. He only knew that Grace had mattered, that Webb had mattered, that every human who stood and fought and died on this rock mattered more than he could express. The line was failing, too many dead, too many wounded. The creatures pushed deeper into the defensive positions, and there was nothing to stop them. Colonel Yusuf's voice came over the communication channel. One word. Charge. Every tactical doctrine said this was suicide. Every strategic calculation said retreat was the only option. But retreat meant death anyway. Retreat meant letting the swarm consume another world, another billion lives, another chance for something better. The humans charged. They screamed as they ran. Not battle cries, not coordinated calls, just raw human voices raised against the darkness. They charged with broken weapons and bleeding wounds and tears on their faces. Rilak ran with them. He did not think about tactics. He did not consider weapon cycles. He simply ran and screamed and killed everything in his path. Not with Vorani precision, with human fury, with human grief, with human love. The charge broke the swarm's momentum. The creatures had expected prey, not predators. They had expected fear, not fury. For one critical moment they hesitated. The line held barely, but it held. When the wave finally broke, when the survivors stumbled back to the trenches, Rilak counted the cost. 19 humans had begun the day. 11 remained standing. Okonkwo was still alive, though barely. Daishi was bleeding from a dozen wounds, but walking. Grace and Webb were gone, along with 7 others whose names Rilak had just begun to learn. He sat in the mud and blood and did not try to stop his tears. Around him, the humans did the same. They had won nothing. They had only survived to fight again. But they had fought, they had stood. They had looked into the face of death and charged instead of running. Rilak finally understood the word courage. It was not fearlessness. It was fear that had found something worth dying for. Silence sat heavy on Tessara 7 as the survivors prepared for what they knew would be the final battle. The swarm had pulled back to regroup, but everyone understood what was coming. The main force was still out there, endless and hungry. The coalition had less than 200 soldiers left across the entire moon. Rilak counted the humans in his sector. 11 remained from the original 30. He was the last Vorani still standing in their area. Somewhere during the night, without anyone announcing it, he had stopped being their liaison and started being their brother. Okonkwo should not have been alive. The poison from her wound had spread through her shoulder, turning the flesh black. The medics had wanted to amputate. She had refused. "I need my arm to hold my rifle," she said. "Give me something for the pain and let me fight." They had given her something. She was still standing. That was all that mattered now. Daishi sat beside Rilak, cleaning his weapon with hands that would not stop shaking. His children's pictures were tucked inside his armor, close to his heart. He had stopped looking at them after the second wave, looking hurt too much. "Daishi," Okonkwo said, walking over, "I am giving you command of the flanking squad, 4 soldiers. You hit them from the east when the main assault comes." Daishi looked up. His eyes were red, exhausted, ancient with pain. "That is a suicide position." "Every position is a suicide position now." The corporal nodded slowly. He stood and began gathering his squad. Before he left, Okonkwo grabbed his arm. "Come back to your children," she said softly. "That is an order." Daishi smiled. It was the saddest expression Rilak had ever seen. "I will try, Sergeant, but if not, tell them their father stood tall. Tell them he did not run." He walked away with his 4 soldiers, disappearing into the pre-dawn darkness. Colonel Yusuf came to their position an hour before the assault. He walked the entire defensive line, moving from soldier to soldier, species to species. He did not give speeches. He simply clasped hands, called people by name, looked them in the eyes. When he reached Rilak, the colonel paused. "You are a long way from your people, Vorani." "My people are here," Rilak heard himself say. "These humans, they are my people now." Yusuf studied him for a long moment, then he extended his hand. "Then welcome to the family." They shook. The colonel moved on. Rilak watched him go and felt something warm in his chest despite the cold fear that still lived there. The swarm came with the false dawn. They had evolved again. Bigger creatures, faster creatures, creatures with armor that shrugged off the first weapon cycles. The coalition lines buckled instantly. Soldiers died in waves. Rilak fought beside Okonkwo and the remaining humans. They did not bother with tactics anymore. There was no time for tactics. There was only killing, dying, and trying to stay alive one more second. The eastern flank erupted in explosions. Daishi's squad had engaged. Rilak could not see them through the chaos, but he could hear their weapons firing, their voices shouting. Then the voices stopped. "Daishi's squad is cut off," someone yelled. "They are surrounded." Okonkwo looked at Rilak. "We cannot reach them. We cannot spare anyone." Rilak looked at the battlefield. Tactical logic said Daishi was already dead. 4 soldiers against thousands of creatures. The math was simple. But math had never stopped the humans. "Yes, we can," Rilak said. He broke from the line before Okonkwo could stop him. He ran toward the eastern flank, toward the impossible, toward his family. Behind him, he heard her cursing. Then he heard her ordering covering fire. Then he heard nothing but his own heartbeat and the screaming of the swarm. He found Daishi in a crater, surrounded by dead creatures and dying soldiers. 2 of the squad were already gone. One was taking her last breaths. Daishi himself was broken, his legs shattered, his armor torn open. But he was still firing, still fighting, still standing even if only on his knees. "Vorani," Daishi laughed when he saw him. Blood bubbled on his lips. "You should not be here. We do not leave family behind." Rilak grabbed Daishi and lifted him. The corporal screamed in pain, but there was no time for gentleness. Creatures were closing in from every direction. Rilak put Daishi over one shoulder and held his weapon with the other hand. He ran, one-handed shooting, carrying a wounded soldier. This violated every principle of Vorani combat training. It compromised effectiveness, reduced accuracy, limited mobility. A true warrior would have left the wounded behind for the greater good. Rilak was no longer a true Vorani warrior. He was something different now, something better. He fought his way back to the lines, killing creatures that got too close, dodging ones he could not fight. Daishi was unconscious by the time they reached safety, but he was breathing. He was alive. Okonkwo pulled them into the trench. "You are insane." "I learned from humans." The battle reached its peak. The line was failing everywhere. Too few soldiers, too many creatures. Rilak prepared himself to die beside his friends, to join Webb and Grace and all the others who had fallen standing. Then the sky lit up. Ships, dozens of them, hundreds. Coalition reinforcements dropping from orbit, their weapons blazing, their landing craft screaming toward the surface. They hit the swarm from above while the survivors hit them from below. The creatures caught between 2 forces began to break. Not retreat, not regroup, but truly break. Their coordination shattered. Their endless hunger turned to mindless panic. Rilak kept fighting until there was nothing left to fight, until the last creature fell, until the silence returned, not heavy this time, but light, clean, free. Around him, soldiers were collapsing. Some laughed, some cried, some simply stared at the sky where their salvation had come from. Okonkwo sat down hard, her poisoned arm hanging useless. "We made it." Rilak sat beside her. His entire body shook with exhaustion and something else. Relief, joy, grief for the fallen. "Daishi," he asked. "The medics have him. He will live. He will see his children again." Rilak closed his eyes. Water ran down his face, and he did not care who saw it. They had fought, they had stood, against all odds, against all logic, against every calculation that said they should have died. They had won, not because they were fearless, because they were afraid and fought anyway, because they loved each other enough to die for each other, because courage was not the absence of fear. It was fear that refused to quit. The memorial wall stretched across the central plaza of Tessara 7 rebuilt base. Names covered every surface, thousands of them, etched in stone that would outlast generations. Rilak stood before it with the human survivors, listening as each name was read aloud. Garcia, Webb, Grace, 17 others from their unit alone. 8 humans had survived from the original 30, 8 out of 30, and yet they called it victory. Sergeant Okonkwo stood beside him, her arm in a sling, the poison finally purged from her system. She would never have full use of that arm again, but she was alive. She was standing. Daishi sat in a hover chair nearby. His legs would heal eventually, the doctors said. He would walk again. He would hold his children again. When Rilak had visited him in the medical ward, the corporal had wept without shame and called him brother. The ceremony ended. Soldiers dispersed. Rilak remained at the wall, reading names he had never known, honoring lives he had never touched. Colonel Yusuf found him there. The Vorani High Command wants to give you a commendation, the Star of Valor, I believe they call it. I know. Will you accept it? Rilak touched the wall where Webb's name was carved. No. May I ask why? Because I did nothing special. I only did what the humans taught me. If anyone deserves recognition, it is them. Yusuf nodded slowly. What will you do now? Rilak had been thinking about this. The answer had come to him in the quiet hours after the battle, when he sat with his human family and watched the stars. I want to teach, he said. I want to return to the Vorani Academy and tell them what I learned here. Maybe I can change something. Maybe I can help my people understand. Yusuf put a hand on his shoulder. That is a kind of courage, too. 3 weeks later, Rilak stood before the Vorani Military Academy. 1,000 young warriors looked up at him with eyes full of certainty. They had no doubt, no fear, no understanding of what those things truly meant. He had been like them once. He wondered if they could become like him. I was sent to Tessara 7 as a liaison, he began. I expected to witness inferior species failing to match Vorani standards. Instead, I witnessed true courage for the first time in my life. The young warriors shifted. Some looked confused, others looked offended. Rilak continued anyway. We have been taught that courage is the absence of fear, that through training and discipline we can eliminate fear entirely, that a warrior who feels fear is flawed. He paused, letting the familiar doctrine settle. We were wronged. Murmurs spread through the assembly. The elders in the back of the room stiffened. This was heresy against 3,000 years of tradition. I watched a human soldier freeze in terror during his first battle. He shook so badly he could not hold his weapon. Every Vorani principle said he was worthless, broken, a liability. Rilak saw the young warriors nodding. They agreed. Of course they agreed. That same soldier threw himself onto an enemy explosive to save 3 wounded comrades. He was terrified when he did it. He died terrified, but he did it anyway because he loved the people behind him more than he loved his own life. Silence now, complete and heavy. I watched a human medic run into open fire 7 times to save wounded soldiers. She knew she would probably die. She was afraid. She did it anyway. On her 7th rescue, she gave her life to save a Vorani warrior, a stranger, someone not even of her species. Rilak felt his eyes burning. He did not try to stop it. I watched humans weep for their dead and then stand up to fight again. I watched them admit their fear to each other and become stronger for it. I watched them charge into certain death because someone had to, because giving up meant letting darkness win. He looked across the sea of young faces. Humans have a saying, courage is not the absence of fear. It is the judgment that something else is more important than fear. Love, duty, hope, the refusal to let the people beside you stand alone. The elders were whispering angrily now. Rilak ignored them. I stand before you today because humans who were terrified refused to let that terror win. They taught me that fear is not weakness. Fear is natural. Fear is universal. Every species feels it, even if some pretend otherwise. He thought of Webb's shaking hands, Grace's desperate sprints, Daishi's tears for children he thought he would never see again. True courage is not eliminating fear. True courage is feeling fear, acknowledging it, and standing anyway, because something matters more than your own survival, because someone needs you to stand. Rilak finished his address. The assembly was silent. He did not know if he had changed anything. 3,000 years of tradition did not crumble from one speech. But he saw something in some of the young warriors' eyes: recognition, relief, permission to feel what they had always been told not to feel. That was enough. That was a beginning. 1 year later, Rilak returned to Tessara 7 for the anniversary of the battle. The surviving humans gathered at the memorial wall as they did every year. When they saw him coming, they did not salute or bow or show formal respect. They embraced him. Okonkwo, Santos, the others whose names he had learned in blood and fire. They held him like family because that was what they were. Daishi walked now, with a cane, with difficulty, but walked. He brought his children to meet Rilak, 3 small humans who looked at the tall alien with wonder rather than fear. This is Uncle Rilak, Daishi told them. He carried me home when I could not walk. He saved my life so I could come back to you. The oldest girl, the one who wanted to be a pilot, hugged Rilak's leg. Thank you for saving our daddy. Rilak knelt down to her level. His eyes were wet. He did not try to hide it. Your father saved me too, he said. He taught me what courage really means. He taught me that being afraid is not weakness. Fighting through the fear for the people you love, that is the strongest thing anyone can do. The little girl smiled. Daddy is very brave. Yes, Rilak said. He is, and so are you for being proud of him. He stood and looked at his human family. They had lost so much. 22 of 30, names on a wall, memories that would fade with time. But they had also gained something. They had gained him, and he had gained everything. Rilak of the Vorani, who had once believed courage meant feeling nothing, stood among humans who felt everything and wept openly for joy. He finally understood what true courage meant. And it looked nothing like what he had expected.